Mafia Boss walked into the hospital room to confront a stranger, but found his ex-wife with twins. The night stretched long and heavy over Milan, the kind of night where silence carried the weight of secrets. The rain came down in sheets, beating against the black limousine that sliced through the empty streets. Inside, Alessandro Romano, the name whispered in fear across every corner of Italy's underworld, sat motionless. His sharp jawline was shadowed by the dim glow of passing streetlights, his eyes fixed on nothing, cold, calculating, deadly. The call had come minutes ago. One of his men, out of breath, trembling. "Boss, we found him. The traitor. He's at San Marco Hospital, badly hurt, but alive." Alessandro's expression hadn't changed. Only his hand moved, tightening his black leather gloves. "Then we end it tonight," he had said, his tone quiet, calm, terrifying. The car stopped abruptly in front of the hospital. Rain splashed across his polished shoes as he stepped out. The guards at the door recognized him instantly and looked away, pretending not to see. Everyone in Milan knew better than to cross paths with the Romano family at midnight. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. Nurses moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. Alessandro's presence turned the sterile hallway into something suffocating. His dark suit clung to his broad frame, a faint scent of expensive cologne mixing with the sterile smell of disinfectant. His steps echoed, slow, deliberate, controlled. Every inch of him screamed authority. Behind him followed Luca, his most trusted man. "Room 305, boss," he whispered, glancing at the file in his hand. "They said the man's name is under a fake ID, but..." Alessandro lifted a hand, silencing him. "I'll handle it." He didn't trust anyone else for this. Betrayal wasn't just a business matter to him, it was personal. He'd built the Romano Empire from blood and loyalty. And anyone who broke that sacred rule deserved to face him directly. As the elevator doors closed, Alessandro's reflection glared back at him, black eyes. A scar beneath his left brow, and the weight of years spent in power. He should have felt satisfaction. Finally catching the traitor meant closure. Yet something inside felt strange tonight, a dull ache in his chest he couldn't name. The doors opened with a soft chime. The corridor was quieter here, almost eerily so. Only the beeping of heart monitors and the rhythmic sound of a ventilator broke the silence. He walked toward room 305, hand resting on the gun holstered beneath his coat. One deep breath, the air cold and metallic, and then he pushed open the door. The world seemed to stop. The gun slipped from his grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Lying pale and fragile beneath the white hospital sheets was not the traitor he expected. It was Isabella. Her face, delicate, unchanged despite the years, glowed faintly under the fluorescent light. A few strands of chestnut hair framed her cheeks, and her lips were colorless, barely moving as she breathed. For a moment, Alessandro forgot how to breathe himself. He hadn't seen her in 5 years. Not since that night, the night their marriage shattered under the weight of lies, pride, and the empire he refused to leave. She had walked away without a word, without a trace. He'd searched at first, out of anger, then out of heartbreak. But eventually, he buried her memory under work, women, and wars. And yet here she was, the ghost of his past, lying unconscious in front of him. His hands trembled as he reached out, almost afraid to touch her. "Isabella," he whispered, voice breaking for the first time in years. The name felt foreign on his tongue, like something forbidden. Her chest rose and fell weakly. The heart monitor beeped in slow rhythm, matching the thunder outside. He took a hesitant step forward, his gaze scanning her arms, her face, searching for signs of what had happened. There was an A4 line taped to her wrist, bruises along her forearm. It looked like she had been through something terrible. The door creaked open behind him. A nurse entered, startled to see the tall man in a black coat standing by the bed. "Sir, visiting hours are..." Alessandro turned, his glare enough to silence her instantly. "What happened to her?" His voice was low, dangerous. The nurse hesitated. "She was brought in this evening. Found unconscious near the docks. No ID, just her name whispered once before she fainted. Isabella Romano." The sound of his surname hit him like a punch. Romano. She still used his name. "Leave us," he ordered coldly. The nurse nodded quickly and backed away, closing the door behind her. Now, it was just him and Isabella. The air felt heavier, filled with everything they never said. That he sat slowly on the chair beside her bed. His mind was a storm, guilt, anger, confusion, love, all crashing together. He had killed men without blinking, yet one look at her and he was undone. Her lips parted slightly, a whisper escaping between shallow breaths, Ale. It was so faint he almost thought he imagined it. But she had said his name. After all this time, she still remembered. Alessandro leaned forward, his hand brushing her hair gently back from her face. I'm here, Bella, he murmured. I'm right here. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, but he didn't hear it. For the first time in years, Alessandro Romano, the ruthless mafia king, felt fear. Not of bullets, not of betrayal, but of losing the only woman who ever truly mattered. Alessandro sat in silence, his hand still resting near hers. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the room, steady, fragile, haunting. He'd heard the sound of gunfire, screams, explosions, but nothing ever struck him like that quiet, steady pulse. It was the sound of her life, the one thing he'd thought he'd lost forever. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Every scar, every breath, every faint flutter of her lashes pulled him further away from the cold man he had become. He tried to speak, but his throat closed. The words refused to come. He was Alessandro Romano, a man who commanded armies, who decided life and death with a glance, yet here, he was powerless. A soft knock broke the silence. Luca, his right-hand man, stepped inside, his eyes scanning the scene before freezing in disbelief. Boss. That's. Alessandro lifted a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. I know who she is. Luca hesitated, his voice dropping. Should I call the doctor? Alessandro didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed fixed on Isabella. Make sure no one comes near this room. No one touches her without my permission. Not a single soul. Luca nodded quickly. Understood. He left, closing the door gently behind him. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His chest burned. Every breath carried a memory. The laughter they once shared, her scent on his pillow. The way she used to trace his scar with her fingertips and whisper that it made him human. He remembered their last argument, the one that ended everything. The shouting. The shattered glass. Her tears. Alessandro, I can't live like this. Every night, I wonder if I'll lose you to your world. And his reply, sharp and unforgiving, this world is who I am. He'd watched her walk away without stopping her. Pride had chained his heart then. But now, sitting beside her motionless body, that same pride felt like poison. The minutes turned into hours. Nurses peeked through the glass but dared not enter. He hadn't moved. The once fearless boss now looked like a man drowning quietly in regret. When Isabella's fingers twitched slightly, Alessandro froze. His breath caught in his throat, her lips parted, her voice a soft, broken whisper. Where am I? He leaned closer instantly. You're safe, Bella. You're at San Marco Hospital. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing those deep brown eyes he had dreamed about but never thought he'd see again. Confusion clouded them at first, then fear. Then recognition. Her gaze locked onto his face, and for a heartbeat, neither spoke. The years between them disappeared, replaced by something raw and painful. Alessandro? She breathed, disbelief trembling in her voice. He swallowed hard, forcing a nod. It's me. Her eyes welled up instantly. No? No, it can't be. You're real, he finished softly. I'm right here. She tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her ribs. He reached out instinctively, helping her adjust the pillow. The warmth of his hands made her flinch, the memories flooding back like a tidal wave. Why are you here? She whispered, her voice fragile. You shouldn't be. I came for someone else, he admitted quietly. But I found you instead. Her eyes searched his face, disbelief mingling with sorrow. You shouldn't have come, Ale. It's dangerous for you. He almost laughed, a broken, bitter sound. Dangerous? For me? His tone softened. I've walked through hell, Isabella. But nothing ever burned like losing you. Tears rolled down her cheeks. You don't understand. He leaned forward, eyes dark and steady. Then make me understand. Her lips trembled, but no words came. She looked away, focusing on the floor, the white walls, anything but his eyes. Her silence told him everything. There was pain deeper than he could imagine, secrets hidden in her trembling breath, but he didn't push. For the first time in his life, Alessandro didn't demand answers. He just stayed. He sat back down, his voice softer than she remembered. You should rest. You're safe now. Her eyes flicked toward him again, unsure whether to believe that promise. Safe, she repeated, the word almost ironic. You can't protect me from everything, Ale. Not anymore. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe not. But I can try. Outside, rain lashed against the window. The storm had returned, echoing the turmoil inside both of them. Isabella's breathing slowed again, exhaustion pulling her back toward sleep. Before she drifted off, she whispered something faintly, so quiet he almost didn't hear it. I never stopped loving you. Alessandro froze. His chest tightened painfully, his throat constricting around words that refused to come. He reached out, brushing his thumb gently across her knuckles. I know, he murmured, his voice barely audible. When she finally fell asleep, Alessandro stood, moving toward the window. The city lights shimmered below, distorted by the rain. Somewhere out there, enemies plotted against him, empires shifted. Alliances crumbled, but none of it mattered tonight. All that mattered was the woman lying behind him. He turned back, watching her in silence. For years, he had buried every trace of emotion beneath layers of power and control. Yet, tonight, all of that felt meaningless. He would have given up every cent, every gun, every title, just to keep her breathing. He pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down again. For the first time since his rise to power, Alessandro Romano prayed. Not to any god he believed in, but to fate, to life. To anything that would listen. Don't take her from me again, he whispered into the dark. The rain kept falling. But the storm inside him began to quiet, replaced by something unfamiliar. Hope. He stayed by her side until dawn. The morning light crept through the half-closed blinds, brushing against Alessandro's face as he blinked away the fatigue of a sleepless night. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with that post-storm silence that always made him restless. He rose from the chair, stretching the stiffness from his muscles, and glanced at Isabella, still fragile, but her color had returned slightly. For the first time since he'd walked into that hospital, she looked at peace. He almost smiled, a rare, fleeting expression, until her voice, faint, trembling, broke through the stillness. Please, don't wake the babies. The words sliced through him. Babies? For a second, he thought she was delirious, but then he turned, and his entire world shifted. In the corner of the room, half hidden by the curtain, were two small cribs. He stepped closer slowly, almost afraid to breathe, afraid the moment would vanish if he did. Inside, wrapped in soft blue blankets, lay two infants, identical, innocent, sleeping soundly as if the world outside wasn't cruel and dangerous. His pulse pounded in his ears. The sight was surreal. His mind refused to accept what his eyes saw. Two. Not one, two. He reached for the edge of a crib, his hand trembling for the first time in years. The tiny fingers of one baby twitched, curling instinctively as if sensing him. His throat tightened. Isabella's voice came again, weak but steady. I named them Matteo and Luca. The names hit him like a wave, familiar, sacred. He turned toward her, confusion and emotion battling behind his dark eyes. Yours? The question barely escaped his lips, a whisper of disbelief. She nodded faintly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. Ours. The word lingered between them, soft but explosive, rewriting every truth he had built since she left. The ruthless mafia boss, a man feared by hundreds, felt his knees weaken as he stared at the sleeping twins. His twins. The weight of 5 lost years crashed over him all at once, every deal, every drop of blood spilled, every night spent pretending he didn't care. All of it suddenly meant nothing. He looked back at Isabella, his voice breaking in a way he didn't know it could. Why didn't you tell me? Her lips trembled, guilt shadowing her face. Because the night I left, you were already gone? To that world of guns and vengeance. I couldn't let them grow up in it. Alessandro closed his eyes, his jaw tightening. He wanted to be angry, to demand answers, to curse fate, but all he could feel was a deep, aching regret. He stepped closer to the cribs again, his hand hovering over the twins, afraid to touch, afraid to claim. For the first time in his life, Alessandro Romano, the man who had built an empire on fear, realized what true powerlessness felt like. It wasn't in losing money or territory. It was in standing inches away from the two lives he'd never known existed and realizing he'd missed their first cries, their first smiles, their first heartbeat. The weight of that truth crushed him, leaving only silence, the kind that comes when a man meets the ghost of the life he could have had. The steady hum of machines filled the quiet hospital room as Alessandro remained frozen beside the cribs, unable to tear his gaze away from the two tiny faces before him. Each soft breath, each little twitch of their fingers felt like a dagger to his chest, reminding him of every moment he'd missed, every second he'd wasted chasing revenge instead of love. Matteo stirred first, his small mouth opening in a sleepy yawn before settling again, while Luca clenched his tiny fist as if ready to fight the world already. Alessandro couldn't help but let out a shaky breath, his lips curving into a faint, unsteady smile. "They're perfect," he whispered, almost to himself. As though afraid that saying it too loud might wake them or break the fragile spell holding him together. He turned toward Isabella, who was now fully awake, watching him with tired, glassy eyes. There was fear there, fear of what his presence meant, fear of reopening wounds she'd fought to heal, but beneath it lingered something else, a flicker of the love they once shared. She tried to sit up, and he rushed to her side without thinking, instinct taking over where pride once ruled. "Don't," he said softly, adjusting her pillow with care. "You're still weak." She hesitated, her breath trembling. "You shouldn't be here, Alessandro. If anyone finds out." Her words trailed off, but he didn't need her to finish. He knew exactly what she meant. His enemies, his world, it was no place for innocence. No place for her. Yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. He sank into the chair beside her, resting his elbows on his knees, his head hanging low. 5 years, he murmured. 5 years, Isabella. You vanished, and I thought you were dead. Do you know what that did to me? His voice cracked at the edges, his usual steel giving way to something raw. Isabella looked away, her fingers gripping the blanket. I know, she whispered. But I couldn't stay. Every night I saw the news, another death, another war you started. I couldn't raise them in that darkness. They deserve light, Ale. They deserve peace. Her words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong. But deep down he knew she wasn't. He had built his empire on fear and blood. And though he ruled with control, the chaos had always found a way to seep into everything he loved. He exhaled slowly, staring at the floor. You think I don't regret it? He said quietly. Every night I see your face. And every morning I wake up wishing I'd chosen you over everything else. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken pain. A faint cry from one of the cribs broke the tension. Isabella's expression softened immediately. It's Matteo, she said gently. Alessandro stood, crossing the room before she could move. He looked down at the baby, his son, and hesitated only a second before lifting him carefully into his arms. The weight was light, fragile, almost unreal. The tiny heartbeat against his chest sent a surge of emotion through him so intense it made his throat tighten. Matteo opened his eyes, soft hazel, just like Isabella's, and for the first time in years. Alessandro smiled without pain behind it. Isabella watched silently, tears welling as she saw the man she once loved. The man she thought was gone forever, holding their child like something sacred. He looks like you, she said softly. Alessandro looked up, meeting her gaze, and there was a flicker of warmth between them, small, uncertain, but alive. Then maybe he'll do better than me, he murmured, his voice heavy with regret. He placed Matteo gently back in the crib, adjusting the blanket with a tenderness that didn't fit the man the world knew as a monster. For a moment, the years of hatred and distance seemed to fade. It was just them, the way it had once been, before the lies, before the wars, before the night everything burned. But the illusion cracked when the door opened slightly and Luca stepped in again, giving Alessandro a worried look. "Boss," he whispered, "we need to go. People are asking questions. The guards can't hold them off forever." Alessandro didn't turn immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on Isabella, on the twins, on everything he'd just rediscovered. "I'm not leaving her," he said quietly. "Not this time." Luca hesitated, lowering his voice. "You have enemies in every corner of this city. If they find out she's here, if they find out about them, you'll put her in more danger than ever." Isabella's hand gripped the blanket tighter. "He's right, Ale. You have to go. Please." He finally looked at her, and the defiance in his eyes softened into something heartbreakingly vulnerable. "I've spent 5 years building an empire," he said slowly. "But I'd burn it all down for one more chance to hold what's mine." Her breath hitched at his words. But before she could reply, he stepped closer. Lowering his voice to a whisper meant only for her. "I'll protect you, Isabella. All 3 of you. No one touches my family." The words felt dangerous in his mouth, like a promise written in blood, but there was truth behind them. The kind that came from a heart finally remembering what it beat for. She didn't stop him when he knelt beside her, taking her trembling hand in his. For the first time in years, their fingers intertwined. And in that small, quiet moment, the ruthless mafia boss and the woman who once tamed his darkness sat in silence, surrounded by the soft sound of their children breathing. And though the world outside would never understand, inside that room Alessandro felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace, fragile and fleeting, but real. The next morning carried a fragile calm that felt foreign inside the walls of the hospital. The early sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting faint golden lines across the room where Isabella rested and the twins slept soundly. Alessandro stood near the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a half-burnt cigarette he never lit. He stared at the rising sun as if trying to make sense of his own shadow. His reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, softer, uncertain. He had spent his life mastering control, yet this woman and those 2 tiny souls had unraveled him without a single word. He turned when Isabella stirred, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You stayed." He didn't answer right away. He had, in fact, stayed every night since he found her, despite his men's warnings, despite the danger it brought. He had dismissed his guards, bribed doctors for silence, and guarded the room himself. Not out of obligation, but because walking away felt impossible. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, but laced with something raw. "I need to know the truth, Isabella." Her eyes, still tired but filled with dread, met his. "Ale, please, are they mine?" The question hung between them, sharp enough to cut through air. For a moment, she said nothing, her hands tightening around the blanket. Then, slowly, tears began to form, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. "You were too dangerous, Ale," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I had to protect them." His jaw clenched, and for a long moment, he said nothing. The silence was heavier than shouting, heavier than any threat he'd ever made. He looked down, unable to trust himself to speak. When he finally did, his voice broke in a way it hadn't since he was a boy. "Protect them, from me?" Her tears came faster now. "Not just you, your world. The guns, the blood, the enemies. I couldn't raise them in that life. You don't understand what it felt like, waiting every night for someone to tell me you were dead." Alessandro turned away, staring at the twins. They slept peacefully, unaware of the storm swirling around them. "So you took them away," he said quietly. "Took my children away, and I didn't even know they existed." "I didn't want to," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "But I had no choice. You were becoming someone I didn't recognize anymore. I thought one day you'd come for me. But you never did." Her words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. He closed his eyes, fighting the sting behind them. "You left," he said softly, almost to himself. "And when you left, the world stopped making sense." He walked to the cribs and knelt beside them. His fingers trembled as he reached for Mateo's hand, so small, so perfect, so unaware of the darkness that once surrounded their father. The baby's fingers curled instinctively around his, and in that instant, something inside Alessandro broke, not from pain, but from realization. He had spent years fighting for power, but it all felt meaningless compared to this single touch. Isabella watched him. Silent tears falling as she saw the man she once loved, the ruthless boss turned vulnerable father. For the first time in years, there was no armor around him, no rage, no ego. Just a man, stripped bare by truth. He didn't look at her when he spoke again. "I would have given up everything for them," he murmured. "For you." She swallowed hard, her heart aching at his tone. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I couldn't tell you. Because if I had, you would have tried to protect us, and it would have destroyed you." He finally turned toward her, eyes dark and shining. "It already did." The room fell silent again, but it wasn't the heavy silence of anger. It was the silence of two hearts that had been apart too long, now beating cautiously in the same space. The past hung between them, all the lies, the choices, the pain, but something fragile had started to grow in its shadow. That night, Alessandro returned to the hospital again. He didn't announce himself or stay long. He simply left a bouquet of white lilies on Isabella's bedside table, a small teddy bear beside each crib, and a note written in his own sharp handwriting: "For every night I wasn't here. For every moment I didn't know that he slipped away before she could wake," and so it continued. Every night, when the hospital fell silent and the city slept, Alessandro Romano came back. He moved like a ghost through the halls, leaving gifts, toys, baby clothes, flowers, never staying long enough to be seen. He would stand by the door for a few minutes, watching them sleep. Then disappear into the darkness. The nurses whispered about him, the dangerous man who visited the children in secret, the shadow that never spoke. But to Alessandro, it wasn't guilt driving him anymore. It was something purer. Something he thought he'd lost forever. Love, buried beneath years of violence, had begun to breathe again. The hospital had begun to feel like a second home to Alessandro, a strange irony for a man who once ruled every corner of Milan's underground. The guards outside no longer flinched when he arrived past midnight, his expensive shoes silent against the polished floor. He moved like a shadow, a man haunted by everything he couldn't undo. Inside the room, Isabella pretended to sleep the first few nights he came. But she knew the sound of his footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy with guilt. Each time, he would stand by the twins' cribs, brushing a strand of hair from Sophia's face or adjusting Mateo's blanket before leaving something behind. Flowers. Toys. Sometimes, just a folded note with no words, only the faint smell of his cologne that lingered till morning. One night, unable to hold it in any longer, she whispered without opening her eyes, "Why do you keep coming, Ale?" He froze in the doorway. The question wasn't angry, it was tired. Curious, almost fragile. After a long silence, he said quietly, "Because leaving is harder than it's ever been." She turned her head toward him, eyes glistening in the dim light. "You can't keep doing this. The children. They'll start to notice." "I want them to," he murmured, taking a step closer. "I want them to know their father didn't disappear." Her chest tightened. "You can't rewrite the past, Alessandro." "I'm not trying to," he said softly. "I'm trying to earn a future." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The man standing before her wasn't the mafia boss who had once chosen vengeance over love. His voice carried no command, no arrogance, just a quiet desperation that reached deep into her heart. He walked closer, the golden hospital light outlining his sharp features, and sat beside her bed. "I know I destroyed us, Isabella. I thought power would fill the void you left. But it only made me emptier." She looked away, tears silently falling. "You say that now. But what happens when someone crosses you again? When your world calls you back?" He leaned forward, his voice steady but filled with something unrecognizable, humility. "Then I'll walk away. For them. For you. I swear it." She wanted to believe him. Every part of her ached too. But memories of blood, sirens, and sleepless nights kept her heart guarded. Still, seeing him there, tired, remorseful, human, cracked the walls she'd built over the years. The twins stirred softly, and instinctively, both reached for them, their hands brushing. For a moment, it felt like time itself paused. Her eyes met his, and neither spoke. The warmth between their fingers said more than words ever could. Finally, Isabella whispered, "They deserve peace, Ale. Not the life we had." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then I'll give it to them. Whatever it takes." He stood, his gaze lingering on her face before he turned toward the door. "Rest," he said quietly. "You need your strength." But before he left, he added in a voice almost breaking, "And Isabella? Thank you. For keeping them safe when I couldn't." She watched him go, tall, proud, yet somehow broken. The door closed softly, and she pressed her hand to her chest, where her heart still raced. For years she'd hated him for his choices, but now, all she felt was confusion. And something dangerously close to hope outside. Alessandro lit the cigarette he'd carried for nights but never smoked. The flame flickered in the cold air before he crushed it out. For the first time in his life, he didn't need the fire, because something brighter had already started to burn inside him. The quiet hum of machines filled the hospital room. A fragile lullaby for the twins who slept peacefully in their cribs. Outside, the city of Milan shimmered under the silver glow of midnight. It should have been a calm night, but Alessandro's instincts wouldn't let him rest. Years in the underworld had taught him that peace was a lie. It always came before the storm. He stood by the window, his broad frame silhouetted against the pale moonlight, eyes scanning the parking lot below. Something in the air felt wrong, too still, too silent. He reached into his coat, fingers brushing against the cold metal of his pistol. For weeks he had kept his distance from violence, wanting to prove to Isabella that he had changed. But now, his old life was reaching back for him. Down the hall, a light flickered. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate. Not hospital staff. Alessandro turned sharply, his pulse steadying as the old instinct surged back. He crossed the room and quietly locked the door, his eyes moving to Isabella, who stirred awake at the sound. "Alessandro." She whispered, confused, rubbing her eyes. He raised a finger to his lips. "Shh. Don't move." The tone in his voice, calm but commanding, made her blood run cold. She knew that voice. The protector. The hunter. The man she'd once feared and loved in equal measure. A second later, the first gunshot shattered the silence. A glass burst inward as two masked men kicked the door. Isabella screamed, clutching the twins close as Alessandro spun, firing a single precise shot that hit the first intruder in the shoulder. The man fell, dropping his weapon, but another rushed in from behind, aiming straight for the cribs. Alessandro lunged, throwing himself in front of the babies as a second shot rang out. Pain ripped through his arm, hot, sharp, burning. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay upright. Blood ran down his sleeve, staining the white hospital floor. "Run," he shouted, his voice deep and desperate. "Isabella, take them." But she didn't move. She couldn't. Her hands trembled as she stared at him, the man she'd sworn she would never need again, now standing between her and death itself. Alessandro fired again, one-handed, his injured arm shaking but his aim deadly. The last attacker stumbled back, clutching his chest before collapsing. The echo of gunfire faded into the night, replaced by the wail of alarms and distant footsteps of approaching security. For a long moment, the world stood still. Only the soft cries of the twins broke the silence. Alessandro's breathing came heavy, uneven. He turned toward Isabella, his face pale but eyes blazing with something fierce, not anger, not fear, but love. "Are you hurt?" he asked through gritted teeth. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You're bleeding," he gave a faint smile, brushing it off. "It's nothing." She grabbed his arm, her hand slick with his blood. "Don't you dare say that. You could have died." He looked at her, and in that single gaze was everything he'd never said: regret, longing, and the silent promise that he'd never let anything harm her again. Outside, the shrill sound of police sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the room in chaos and color. Alessandro's knees buckled slightly, the pain catching up with him. Isabella caught him before he could fall, guiding him to the bed. Her voice trembled as she pressed a towel to his wound. "Why would you do this? Why throw yourself in front of them?" His answer came in a whisper, rough and real. "Because they're my world now." Tears blurred her vision. She had spent years hating the man who destroyed their marriage, but in that moment, all she saw was the man who once held her in the rain and promised to protect her, the man she thought was gone forever. As the sound of boots thundered down the hall and police shouted orders, Alessandro leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I lost you once," he breathed, voice shaking with exhaustion. "I won't lose you again." His words hung in the air, a vow, a confession, a plea. And for the first time in 5 years, Isabella didn't pull away. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cars spilled across the sterile white walls, painting them in hues of chaos and heartbreak. The corridor outside buzzed with sirens and shouting, but inside the hospital room, everything felt suspended, a silent bubble where only two hearts beat in rhythm with fear and relief. Isabella's trembling hands pressed the towel tighter against Alessandro's wound. The fabric was soaked in crimson now, her fingers slick and shaking. "Stay awake," she whispered, her voice breaking as she wiped the sweat from his brow. "Ale, look at me. Don't you dare close your eyes." He managed a small, crooked smile, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're still bossing me around, some things never change." "Don't joke," she snapped through tears, her face wet and pale. "You're losing blood, I've had worse," he muttered, trying to sound strong, but the strain in his tone betrayed him. The doctors burst through the door moments later, a flood of white coats and urgency. "Step back," one of them ordered, pushing Isabella gently aside as they lowered Alessandro onto a stretcher. His gaze never left her, not once, even as the paramedics cut away his blood-soaked sleeve and prepped him for surgery. "Stay with me," she whispered again, clutching his hand until they tried to move him. He gripped her fingers weakly, his voice fading but full of stubborn warmth. "I'll always come back to you, always." The door swung shut behind him, leaving Isabella standing there with the twins crying softly in their cribs. Her knees gave way, and she sank into the chair, burying her face in her hands. For the first time in years, she didn't know if she was praying for a man she hated, or the man she'd never stopped loving. Hours passed like centuries. The hallway outside was filled with police officers, doctors, and the press whispering the name Alessandro Romano, the mafia boss caught in a shootout, bleeding in a hospital. But Isabella didn't care about any of it. Her world had narrowed to the single door down the hall where they were trying to save him. When the surgeon finally emerged at dawn, exhaustion written across his face, she stood so quickly the chair toppled behind her. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Is he?" The doctor smiled faintly. "He'll live." The bullet went through his arm, missed the artery. "He's strong." Her knees almost gave out again, this time in relief. "Can I see him?" "Just for a few minutes," the doctor replied gently. When she entered his room, Alessandro was half asleep, his arm wrapped in thick bandages, the steady beep of the heart monitor filling the silence. His face was pale, but peaceful, the hard lines of power softened by pain and vulnerability. She stood beside him for a long moment, her heart aching at the sight. The same man who once terrified half of Milan now looked fragile, almost boyish. Carefully, she reached out and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead, his eyes fluttered open. "You're here," he murmured, voice raspy. "I'm always here," she said quietly, then caught herself, realizing what she'd just confessed. He smiled faintly, wincing. "That sounded like the woman I used to know." Isabella sat down beside him, her hand trembling as she touched his uninjured arm. "Don't do that again," she said softly. "Don't play hero." "I can't," her voice cracked, "I can't lose you like that." He looked at her, eyes filled with a depth that words couldn't carry. You won't, he promised, his thumb brushing over her fingers. Not this time. She lowered her gaze, tears spilling freely. You shouldn't even be here. You were supposed to be gone from this world. But now you're back, and everything I built to protect them is shaking. Alessandro's voice was quiet but certain. Then let me help you hold it together. She looked up, startled by the honesty in his tone. For years, his words had been weapons, sharp, manipulative, designed to win. But now they were bare, stripped of pride. Outside the room, dawn broke. The first light spilling across Milan's skyline, painting everything gold. For Isabella, it felt like the first sunrise she'd truly seen in years. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper against his ear. Rest now. The twins are safe. That's all that matters. He smiled faintly, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Not all, he whispered. You matter too. As he drifted into sleep, Isabella sat beside him, her hand never leaving his. And though the world outside still whispered his name with fear, inside that quiet room, for the first time, there was peace. The hospital wing that once echoed with chaos now felt like a sanctuary of fragile peace. The sharp scent of antiseptic still lingered in the air, but the tension had faded. Outside the window, Milan's winter sun cast a soft golden hue across the city, and inside, time seemed to slow, as if the universe itself wanted to give them space to heal. Alessandro sat in the recovery room, his arm bound in layers of bandages. He had refused the private suite his men offered and instead chose the room next to Isabella's. Every night, he listened to the faint sound of her lullabies through the thin wall. The melody calmed him more than any medicine could. He had faced countless enemies, survived assassination attempts, and built an empire from the ashes of his youth. But nothing had ever frightened him as much as the idea of losing her again. Stacks of papers lay on the small table beside his bed, legal documents, trust funds, transfer deeds. Each signature he placed on those papers felt like a small act of penance, a way to atone for years he couldn't give back. For the twins? He'd created a future, one untouched by the stains of his world. When Isabella entered quietly that afternoon, he was still bent over the documents, his sharp features softened by exhaustion. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching him. The man she once married had been all arrogance and control, but the one before her now looked almost gentle. What are you doing? She asked softly. Alessandro looked up, surprised. Making things right. She frowned, walking closer. By signing papers? He nodded. By making sure that if anything happens to me, you and the twins will never have to depend on anyone. You'll have everything you need, the house in Lake Como, the shares, the accounts. It's all yours now. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. You think money can fix this? You think it can heal what you broke? He shook his head slowly, his dark eyes steady on hers. No. Money can't fix the past. But it can protect your future. She clenched her fists, trembling. You still don't get it, do you? I never wanted your empire, Alessandro. I wanted you, before it swallowed everything good in you. Her voice cracked on the last words, the years of buried pain finally surfacing. He looked down at his hands, the fingers that once held power like a weapon now trembling slightly. I know, he whispered. And I ruined that. I ruined us. She took a step closer, her anger melting into heartbreak. Then why are you doing this? He exhaled slowly, his voice low and raw. Because this is all I know how to do, to give, to protect, to build walls around the people I love. But I'm learning to let them breathe, too. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the soft cooing of one of the twins in the next room. Isabella's heart softened. For so long, she had carried the image of Alessandro as a man made of steel, untouchable, unbreakable. But now, seeing him like this, vulnerable, trying, human, something inside her began to shift. He met her gaze again, his voice almost a whisper. I can't erase the past, Isabella. I know that. But I can be their father. If you'll let me. The words hung in the air like a confession, trembling with hope and fear. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she walked toward him, her eyes glistening. In her arms, she carried one of the twins, Matteo, still half asleep, his small hand curled into a fist. Without a word, she placed the baby gently into Alessandro's arms. He froze, as if holding something sacred. The warmth of his son's tiny body against his chest broke whatever walls still stood inside him. His throat tightened, and his injured arm trembled as he tried to steady himself. "Then start now," Isabella whispered. Her voice quivering with both pain and forgiveness. Alessandro looked up at her. His dark eyes wet, his heart pounding like it hadn't in years. "I will," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I promise you, I will." He lowered his gaze to the baby in his arms. Matteo shifted slightly, his small hand brushing against Alessandro's chest. That single touch, innocent, trusting, shattered years of emptiness, for the first time in his life. Alessandro felt what true strength was, not in fear, not in power, but in the weight of something so small yet infinite. And as Isabella watched him cradle their child, the faintest smile broke through her tears, because, for the first time, she believed him. The days that followed passed softly, like a melody no one dared interrupt. The chaos that once ruled Alessandro's life had quieted into something unfamiliar: peace. He spent his mornings in the small hospital garden, one arm in a sling, the other cradling one of the twins while the winter sunlight filtered through the trees. Nurses would pass by and glance in disbelief. The once feared name of Milan's underworld now belonged to a man who hummed lullabies and smiled at the sound of a baby's laugh. Isabella often watched from the doorway, arms crossed, pretending to check her phone or the twins' bottles, but really, she couldn't look away. Something about him had changed, not just the way he moved, but the way he was. He no longer carried the weight of control. He carried love, awkwardly, quietly, but sincerely. One afternoon, as she entered the garden, she found him sitting on a bench with Matteo asleep in his lap and little Sofia reaching curiously for the rosary hanging from his neck. Alessandro chuckled softly, catching her tiny hand. "You've got your mother's stubbornness," he whispered to the baby. Isabella's heart clenched. It was such a simple sight, a father and his children, yet it felt like a miracle she'd never dared imagine. He looked up when he sensed her presence, smiling faintly. "They're strong," he said softly. "Like you." She sat beside him, cautious but close enough to feel his warmth. "They'll need to be," she replied, her tone gentle. "The world doesn't always forgive where they come from." Alessandro nodded slowly, his gaze lowering to the sleeping child in his arms. "Then I'll make sure they never have to see that world. I've already told my men, I'm stepping back." Her eyes widened. "Stepping back?" "I've appointed a successor. Someone I trust to keep peace," he said quietly. "I'm done, Isabella. For them. For you." The words hung between them, heavy with disbelief. She searched his face for the lie, the manipulation she used to know so well, but there was none. "Just tired honesty." "You can't just walk away from the life you built," she said after a long pause. He turned to her, his gaze steady. "I can when that life nearly cost me everything I love." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to remind him that men like him never truly escaped their pasts. But then she saw it, the faint tremor in his hand as he stroked Matteo's hair, the exhaustion in his eyes. The gentleness that hadn't existed in years. Maybe he was already escaping it, not by force, but by love. The silence between them softened. Isabella leaned back, her eyes tracing the sky, its pale blue scattered with thin clouds. "You always talked about control," she murmured. "About how the world only respected the strong. But look at you now." He glanced at her, smiling wryly. "I'm still strong." She laughed quietly, the sound delicate, like something fragile being set free. "No, Ale," she said softly, "now you're human." That word hit deeper than she expected. Alessandro looked at her, really looked, and in her reflection, he saw the man he'd been fighting to find again. The husband who once held her under the stars. The dreamer he buried beneath blood and power. Sofia began to fuss in her stroller, breaking the silence. Without thinking, Alessandro rose, handed Matteo gently to Isabella, and lifted Sofia into his arms. The baby nestled against his chest, her small fingers curling around his collar. The ease with which he held her made Isabella's chest ache, both with love and loss. "You're a natural," she whispered. He smiled, eyes never leaving the child. "Maybe I was just waiting for the right reason." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the quiet rustle of the garden. The twins between them, two small pieces of a broken love now holding it together. As the sun dipped lower, casting everything in warm gold, Isabella finally spoke the words she'd been holding for weeks. "You're changing, Ale. I can see it. But I need to know something." He turned to her, calm and patient. "Anything." "Why now?" she asked softly. "Why choose to heal now, after everything?" He hesitated, then said in a voice almost too low to hear, "Because for the first time, I have something worth being better for." Isabella blinked away tears, looking down at the twins sleeping between them. Her voice trembled as she replied, "Then don't stop." He nodded, his jaw set with quiet resolve. "I won't." For the first time in years, their silence wasn't heavy, it was peaceful. The walls that had once divided them were beginning to crumble, replaced by something new. Something fragile but alive, and as the last rays of sunlight touched his face, Isabella realized that the man beside her wasn't the same one who once ruled the city. This Alessandro, bruised, scarred, and trying, was someone she could learn to forgive. Spring arrived quietly, washing away the scent of antiseptic and fear that had haunted their lives for so long. The hospital days were behind them, and with every sunrise, the Romano mansion began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Alessandro kept his promise. The phone calls grew fewer. The armed guards disappeared from the hallways, and for the first time in years, laughter echoed through those marble walls. One morning, Isabella woke to the sound of giggles, the twins' laughter mixing with Alessandro's deep, joyful voice. She walked to the garden balcony and saw him chasing the children across the grass. His once imposing figure now softened by fatherhood. He lifted little Sofia into the air, spinning her until she squealed with delight, while Matteo toddled behind them, determined not to be left out. Isabella leaned on the railing, a quiet smile curving her lips. It still amazed her how a man built on power could surrender so completely to love. Later, as they sat beneath the old oak tree, Alessandro brought out a small box. "I've been waiting for the right day," he said. Inside was a simple silver locket. On one side, a photo of Isabella, radiant and strong. On the other, the twins, smiling in her arms. "I don't need empires anymore," he murmured, fastening it around her neck. "I just need this. Us." Isabella's eyes shimmered. "You've changed so much," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "No," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I just found what was worth changing for." The words lingered in the air like a promise. They watched the sunset together, the golden light wrapping around them and the twins playing at their feet. For the first time in a long time, there was no fear, no past, only peace. As the evening breeze swept through the garden, Isabella rested her head on his shoulder. "Maybe this time," she whispered, "we'll get it right." Alessandro kissed her forehead, his hand resting over hers. "No maybe," he said softly. "This time, it's forever." Months later, the Romano estate had transformed completely. The guards who once stood with cold eyes were gone, replaced by gardeners, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. Alessandro spent his mornings teaching Matteo how to walk, his afternoons feeding Sofia, and his nights beside Isabella, no longer haunted by shadows, but held by warmth. One evening, as they sat on the terrace overlooking the vineyards, Isabella brought him a small envelope. "What's this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Something that came from the city," she said with a soft smile. He opened it. Inside was a letter from the new Mafia head, thanking him for keeping peace and honoring his wish to never be disturbed again. He folded it quietly, setting it aside. "That life feels like another man's story," he said. She smiled. "Maybe it was." The twins crawled toward them, their laughter echoing through the twilight. Alessandro lifted them both, one in each arm. Isabella stood beside him, her hand slipping into his. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The power? The control?" He replied, gazing at the horizon. "No. I used to think power meant being feared. But real power." He looked at her, eyes tender. "Real power is being loved." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes as she whispered, "And you are." They stood there, the four of them bathed in the fading light. The sky turned crimson and gold, the same colors that once painted their chaos, now symbolizing peace. Alessandro kissed Isabella slowly. Deeply, the kind of kiss that spoke of forgiveness, healing, and forever. When they finally pulled apart, Isabella whispered against his lips, "Welcome home." He smiled, not the smirk of a mafia boss, but the quiet smile of a man reborn. The twins giggled. The wind carried the sound of the sea, and for the first time, everything felt right. The house that was once built on blood now echoed with love, and in that moment, Alessandro Romano, the man once feared across continents, realized the greatest empire he would ever rule was the one he built in his heart.